Okay, before we start solving some numerical examples on the decision rule that was developed in the previous video, let's just let me just mention that the decision rule can be expressed also, the one that we discussed in the previous video can also be expressed like this. If this ratio is greater than if this ratio that we have on the left hand side is greater than what we have here on the right hand side, we can say that the hypothesis was H1. If it is less, we can say that it is H0. Now, the ratio that we have on the left hand side is known as the likelihood ratio, and in our future discussions we will express this likelihood ratio as capital lambda. And in this case, since generally what we receive is a vector, I will express it like this. So if in the discussions that ensue, if it is just a single random variable that we receive, I will just write it like this. So in general we express it like this, and the decision rule now becomes eta. So eta is the short notation for this ratio, and we can call it as threshold for the time being, because we are comparing this likelihood ratio, the likelihood ratio, which is the ratio between the two density functions, the conditional density functions, we are comparing it with the threshold to arrive at a decision. And it is also sometimes convenient to go for a log likelihood ratio, where this is the natural log. This is a natural log. We can also go for a log likelihood ratio and express the decision rule like this. So this is called as a likelihood ratio test. That is, you take the likelihood ratio and conduct a test, in the sense you see whether it is greater than or less than eta, where eta is as defined here, and then arrive at a decision on which was the true hypothesis. And this is called as when you express it in terms of natural logs, we call it as a log likelihood ratio test, and this is called as a log likelihood ratio. So again, in the log likelihood ratio test, you take the natural log of the likelihood ratio and conduct a test, in the sense you compare it with the natural log of eta and arrive at a decision. So with this background, with this additional information as compared to where we ended in the previous video, we will take our first example. So the first problem is, this is a binary hypothesis testing problem, and the data that we have with us is that when H1 is the true hypothesis, when H1 is the hypothesis, what we receive is a random variable R, which is Gaussian distributed. So the mathematicians call this as a normal distribution. So we will call it as Gaussian distribution. It is Gaussian, so this stands for normal distribution. So it's a Gaussian distribution with mean mu1 and variance sigma square. And whenever H0 is the true hypothesis, we receive a random variable R which is again Gaussian distributed, normal distributed, with mean mu0 and variance sigma square. Further, we are told that mu1 is greater than mu0. So this is the statement of the problem, and this is the information that we have with us. We have to now develop a decision rule. In fact, we have already developed a decision rule. We have to just specialize that rule to this given problem, and let us see what happens. So let us first find out the likelihood ratio. To get the likelihood ratio, the likelihood ratio or the log likelihood ratio. But to get the log likelihood ratio, we have to first find likelihood ratio. And to get the likelihood ratio, we need to have with us the conditional density functions. Now in this case, we are not receiving a random vector, we just get one random variable. So we need not write it as a vector, we just write like this. Conditional density function of the received random variable given that H1 is the real hypothesis or H1 is the true hypothesis. So from the data, it is clear that this is a Gaussian distributed random variable with mean mu1 and variance sigma square. So I can straight away write this as equal to 1 by root of 2 pi sigma e power minus of r minus mu1 whole square by 2 sigma square. This is the normal distribution, the Gaussian distribution with mean mu1 and variance sigma square. Similarly, we can write the conditional density function when H0 is the true hypothesis. And it is told that it is again Gaussian distributed with mean mu0 and variance sigma square. So 1 by root of 2 pi sigma e power minus of r minus mu0 whole square by 2 sigma square. Now we find out the likelihood ratio. The likelihood ratio is equal to PR H1 by PR H0, and we can straight away divide it here itself. These are not very complicated terms. We can divide it here itself and see that these terms will get cancelled and exponential divided by exponential, so we can use the law of indices and write this as equal to e power minus r minus mu1 whole square plus r minus mu0 whole square by 2 sigma square. And upon expanding the square terms in the numerator of the exponential term, we see that you get r square and r square, it gets cancelled, minus 2r mu1, and this minus will make it 2r mu1. Similarly, you have minus 2r mu0 here, so we can combine those terms, and then you will have a minus mu1 square and a plus mu0 square. So when we expand the numerator term here and cancel the r square term, we will end up getting the likelihood ratio as equal to, so upon simplifying this you will get the likelihood ratio as equal to r square has got cancelled. You will get 2r mu1 minus mu0 plus mu0 square minus mu1 square divided by 2 sigma square. So this is the likelihood ratio which we get in this case, and of course it is compared with eta, and eta we already know what is eta. It has the difference of the costs. It is a function of the difference of the costs and the probability of occurrence of H1 and H0. We are not told anything about that, so we just have eta as it is. When we are given the numbers, we can find out eta. But in this case, we are not given the number, so we just deal with the left-hand side of the likelihood ratio test. And now we can take a natural log of this, because the presence of the exponential here suggests that a log likelihood ratio can end up with an easier expression. So when you take the log likelihood ratio, you will end up getting this. And we will be now, when you conduct the log likelihood ratio test, we will be comparing this with that is, we'll be comparing this we'll be comparing this with natural log of eta. We'll be comparing this with natural log of eta. And it is possible now, if you look at the left hand side, it is possible to take certain terms on the right hand side and have with us on the left hand side only r. And remember, r is the received random variable. So if we do that, what happens is that our log likelihood ratio test becomes quite simple, because all that you will have to do then is compare the received random variable with a certain threshold. So what I mean by that is that we can first take this over to the left hand side. We can take this over to the left hand side, and we will end up getting so we took this term that we had here to the left, and we will get this, and we note that we can take 2 sigma square over here like this. We note that 2 sigma square can be taken over here like this, and then 2 mu1 minus mu naught can be brought here. Now if you see, all that we have to do is, the test is actually this. We have been able to simplify the test to something like this. We have to compare what we receive with what we have on the right hand side, and if it is more than what we have on the right hand side, we can declare H1 was the true hypothesis, and if it is less than what we have on the right hand side, we can declare H0 is the true hypothesis. And what we have on the right hand side is something that we can compute easily, because we have all these terms, all these known to us. We know what is eta, because eta is a function of the cost and the probability of occurrence of hypothesis. So we can compute what is eta. Later we will discuss decision rules where eta cannot be determined. In the sense when we do not have exact knowledge of cost and probability of occurrence of the hypothesis, how we go ahead, that we will discuss later. But for the time being, we know what are the costs and the probability of occurrence of the hypothesis, and we can calculate eta. That means ln eta is with us. Mu naught and mu1 is known to us. Sigma square is also known to us. So the right hand side is something that we can compute and keep it with us. Every time we receive a random variable, we can just compare that random variable with what we have stored, and just declare whether H1 or H0 was the true hypothesis. Of course, we will make errors in between. Sometimes we make errors, but the rule that we have developed ensures that the error will be minimum, the risk will be minimum. So this is how, and of course it is possible to further simplify the right hand side. So let us do that. So when we further simplify this, we can first write this as equal to mu1 square minus mu naught square, and take a negative sign outside. So when we divide 2 sigma square, first we take 2 sigma square inside, it gets 2 sigma square vanishes, these two sigma squares vanishes, and there will be a 2 sigma square which will appear here, because we have taken it inside the brackets. Now we will divide each of these terms with 2 mu1 minus mu naught. You will get 2 mu1 minus mu naught here, and you will have a 2 mu1 minus mu naught here, and this is mu1 minus mu naught. You have mu1 square minus mu naught square, and there is a well-known relation using which you can write this as mu1 plus mu naught. right? Because mu1 plus mu0 into mu1 minus mu0 gives mu1 square minus mu0 square. So I've used that relation and simplified the second term on the right hand side, and this now of course nothing much is possible. Only thing, you can cancel off the 2 from the numerator and denominator. Mu1 minus mu0. So this now is called as the threshold, small letter gamma. So capital lambda, maybe a short while ago I said that this is gamma. It is not gamma, it is capital lambda. The likelihood ratio is capital lambda. If I have said it as capital gamma earlier, I think I said as capital gamma, it's a mistake, it's capital lambda. So what we do is we are comparing the capital lambda with the threshold gamma in this case. That is, we are comparing the received random variable R with the threshold gamma, and then we are taking a decision. Now, suppose the costs, that is the C10 minus C00 divided by C01 minus C11, the costs and the probabilities were such that this became 1. Let's say it was such that this became 1. One possibility is that C10 and C01 is the same, and C00 and C11 is the same. P0 and P1 is also the same. P0 and P1 the same means half each, and the costs are such that these are all the same. In that case, what happens is this ratio will become 1. So that is one possibility. So whenever this ratio is 1, eta becomes 1 and ln eta becomes 0. So in such special cases, when ln eta becomes 0, this term vanishes and we will have the result like this. So this is the test in such cases when eta is 1. You have received a random variable, you will just compare it with the term on the right hand side, which is the new small letter gamma now, and you take a decision. Now we can depict this pictorially, and let me just write it down here again. We can show this decision rule pictorially in terms of the density functions, and it becomes intuitively clear then. Let's say this is the R axis, the received random variable, the R axis, and let's say this is PR H0, conditional density function when H0 is true, and we know that from the data we know that the mean is mu0. And let this be the conditional density function of received random variable when H1 is the true hypothesis. And this is mu1. We have been told that mu1 is greater than mu0. That's why we have plotted it like this. And the variance is the same. So you can see that the spread is the same. And now mu1 plus mu0 by 2 is this. For example, if mu1 was 6 and mu0 was 4, 6 plus 4 by 2 is 10 by 2, that is 5. So 6, 4 and 5, it would have been the exact midpoint. And what does the decision rule say? It says that whenever the received random variable is more than this, you declare H1 is the true hypothesis. And whenever it is less than this, you declare H0 as the true hypothesis. So this is how we can visualize the decision rule working in this particular example. So again, if I'll just quickly give some number, the same numbers I will give just to make the picture clearer. Suppose this was 6, this was 4, this would have been 5, and maybe during a particular trial, or so to say, you may receive R as 5.9. So 5.9 is somewhere here, and you immediately declare H1 was the true hypothesis. You may be wrong. but most of the times you will be right. Similarly, if you receive 0.1, 0.1 is somewhere here and you declare H0 is the true hypothesis. Next you may receive 9, you may receive 5.3, you may receive 5.01, you may receive 4.99. So accordingly you will take a decision whether you are on this side or this side. So this is how the decision rule works in this first simple example. Now we move on to a slightly more complicated example. Okay, so this example is slightly more complicated than the previous one. Again, this is a binary hypothesis testing problem. We have a source which gives out one of two hypotheses, H1 or H0. And the system is such that when H1 is the true hypothesis, a pulse of duration capital T and amplitude M, that could be voltage or current, and a pulse of duration T and amplitude M, constant amplitude M, is transmitted. And if it is H0 that is the true hypothesis, then it is switched off. So if it is something like H1, H1, H0, H1, then we will have this first pulse first, then followed by the same pulse, and then switch off, and then again this pulse. So this is how it is going to look like if H1, H1, H0, H1 is the sequence, just as an example. And what happens is in the course of transmission, noise gets added, and a typical noise waveform may look like this. A typical noise waveform may look like this. This is typical in the sense the next interval, if you see, the noise waveform will be different. Because if the noise waveform is always going to look like this, we can easily compensate. So that is not the case. This is just a typical. It's not that the noise is always like this. So as I said, the next time if you see, the noise may have some other waveform. So this noise gets added in the course of transmission and what you receive, hence what you receive will be a noisy version of whatever was transmitted. So in this example I have shown a noisy version of this. But in general you will get a noisy waveform here from which you have to estimate, we have to find out, not estimate, you have to detect which of the two hypotheses were true. So this is our problem. Now what the receiver is doing is, we have not yet found out what is, we have not yet obtained what is R, because without that we cannot proceed with the log likelihood ratio test. Now what the receiver is going to do is, it is going to take n samples of this. It's going to take n samples. So first sample will be somewhere here, the next sample, then the third sample, and so on and so forth. It's going to take n, capital N samples. So n samples of the received waveform. And then from these n samples, it has to find out which is the most likely hypothesis that was transmitted by the source or given out by the source. Now, what we receive when H1 is the true hypothesis in this case, so we have taken n samples, so what we receive when H1 is the true hypothesis is Ri, R subscript I, which will be equal to M plus Ni, I ranging from 1 to 3 up to n. So each value of I represents one sample that you have obtained here. So if I is equal to 1, you have obtained the first sample. So what you get is R1 equal to M plus N1. N1 is the first sample of the noise. R2 will be the second sample of this, which will be M plus N2. N2 is the next sample of noise, and so on and so forth. Like this you will get it. And if it is H0 is the true hypothesis, then what you receive will be, M will not be there, because whenever H0 is there, it is just switched off, so you receive only noise samples. Again, I is 1, 2, 3 up to N. So this is what you have with you. So from this Ri, n values of R, you have to detect which is the true hypothesis. So let's develop the decision rule. Now we have been told that the noise samples, each of the noise samples Ni are Gaussian distributed with mean 0 and variance sigma square. Each noise sample is of mean 0 and variance sigma square, and we are also told that the noise samples are mutually independent. So N1 is independent from N2, independent from N3, and so on and so forth. So these noise samples are not dependent on each other. They are statistically independent. That will reduce the complexity to a great extent, and it is a good approximation in practice. So with this information, we will develop the decision rule. So it is noteworthy that in this case what you have received is a random vector, because you are getting n random variables. So when you put them together and stack them together, you get a random vector. So in this case you have a random vector. So let's do one thing. Let us find out. Let's first find out the conditional density function of Ri. Ri given H1 is true. Conditional density function of Ri given H1 is true. That will be actually, before I write the expression, it is clearly obvious from this that it will be a Gaussian distributed random variable whose mean is m, because noise is Gaussian distributed with mean 0. If you just add m to it, you will get a Gaussian distributed random variable of same variance and mean m. So 1 by root of 2 pi sigma e power minus Ri minus m whole square by 2 sigma square. And since each of these noise samples are statistically independent, when you try to find out what is the conditional density function of received random vector when H1 is the true hypothesis, you are actually trying to find out the joint density function of R1, R2, R3, R4 up to Rn. And since each of them have this density function and they are statistically independent, you will simply end up multiplying these n times. So I can write it like this. This term. You will simply multiply it. Now, by using the law of indices, we can rewrite this as, of course, raised to n, and this will be a summation. This will be a summation. And by virtue of the same argument, we can write here mean is 0, and hence we just have Re square. So now that you have these two conditional density functions, you can go ahead and find out what is the likelihood ratio and proceed with the development of the decision rule for this specific example. So going ahead with that, we now find out the likelihood ratio, and we can write it as the ratio of the two density functions which we had arrived at just now. So PR H1, that is density function of the vector R given H1, divided by PR H0, that's what it is. And PR H1 is 1 by root of 2 pi sigma raised to n e power minus 1 by 2 sigma square summation I 1 to n m minus Ri square, and that is divided by the PR H0, which is as given here. Now you can see that gets cancelled, this gets cancelled, and we can bring this in the numerator, and using the law of indices we can add this with this, and the result will be this is the result of that manipulation. So the summation is now applicable to both these terms. And again, we can simplify this. So we can now simplify this. There should have been a bracket here closing the whole chain of brackets. Now we can simplify this, or maybe probably before we simplify it, we can take because of the exponential nature of this, we can take the log likelihood ratio, and we will have minus 1 by 2 sigma square when we take the log likelihood ratio, and you have this summation here. And that step is self-explanatory, and we have consequently, due to this step, we will have, rather there is one small correction which I may be permitted to do here, because I brought e power minus 1 by 2 sigma square. So maybe I will write it here, what is the mistake I made, so that it's easier for you to follow, because otherwise it may be a bit confusing. So earlier I had this in the denominator. Along with 1 by root of 2 pi sigma raised to n. 1 by root of 2 pi sigma raised to n got cancelled, and this was brought to the numerator. And when we brought this to the numerator, this sign will become plus, and since I have taken minus 1 by 2 sigma square common, this will be minus instead of plus. So earlier I had a plus there, that was a mistake. So I'll just repeat that again. This is the one which we take to the numerator. When we take this to the numerator, this becomes plus. And since 1 by 2 sigma square is minus 1 by 2 sigma square is taken common, you will get a minus here. So you can verify it by opening these brackets. You can see minus 1 by 2 sigma square summation of this plus 1 by 2 sigma square summation of Ri square, which is the one which you get when you take this to the numerator. Right. So there is a negative sign here, and that means it's a negative sign here, and this gets cancelled. This gets cancelled, and you will end up getting this, which is the same as minus 1 by 2 sigma square summation I is equal to 1 to n m square is just n m square, because you are just adding m square to itself n times. That is nothing but a sort of multiplication, and minus 2m summation I1 to n Ri, and this is compared with natural log eta, where we know what eta is from the earlier discussions, and we say either h1 or h0 is the true hypothesis. So this is what we have with us now, and now what we do is, as we did earlier, we will try to have only the Ri term on the left hand side, and rest all we will try to take it to the right hand side, so that we will be comparing only what we have received with a threshold. So we can do that by first opening up this bracket and taking certain terms on the other side. So I will do it one by one. So when I just open up the bracket, I will get minus 1 by 2 sigma square n m square, which will take first to that side. So when I multiply this with this, I get m by sigma square summation I 1 to n Ri natural log eta is there, and this term will now go to the right hand side, which gives us and further sigma square by, that is m by sigma square, can be taken over to that side, and we will get sigma square by m. We will get sigma square by m, and of course you can further manipulate it by taking it inside the brackets. You will get sigma square by m ln eta, which is a simple step, plus n m by 2. So this becomes the threshold gamma with which we compare this. So what we do is the ideal, the optimum receiving strategy in this case, the optimum decision rule in this case is to add those n samples and compare it with this threshold. And this threshold will be known to us in advance because all these terms are known as in the previous example. And Ri is anyhow you are sampling and getting it. So this is the way the decision rule works in this example. So this example is an assignment for you. When H1 is the true, of course I'll give the final answer, but you have to work it out. So when H1 is the true hypothesis, received, what you receive is a Gaussian distributed random variable with mean 0 and variance sigma 1 square for I 1, 2, 3 up to n. So you are going to get n samples, R1, R2, R3 like that, n samples, and each sample is Gaussian distributed with mean 0 and variance sigma 1 square. And when H0 is the hypothesis, what you receive is again a Gaussian distributed random variable of mean 0 but variance sigma 0 square, again for I 1, 2, 3 up to n. So whether H1 is, if H1 is the true hypothesis, you get n samples. Each sample is normal distributed or Gaussian distributed with mean 0 and variance sigma 1 square. And if H0 is the true hypothesis, you receive n random variables with mean 0 and variance sigma 0 square, which are Gaussian distributed. They are independent, of course, mutually. So develop a decision rule, and you are supposed to get this as the answer. You are supposed to get this as the answer. You can get back if you don't get this as the answer. I will work it out again and tell you whether whose answer is wrong. So this is gamma, and this is how the decision rule works. So that's an assignment for you. Okay, now the last example. Now in this example, when H1 is the true hypothesis, the received random vector is Poisson distributed. It is Poisson distributed and its mean is M1. And when H0 is the true hypothesis, again you receive a random variable of the same distribution with mean M0. And of course, we are told M1 is greater than M0. Now, the Poisson distribution, the probability of a random variable R which has a Poisson distribution to take a specific value R. Remember, it's a discrete distribution. So to take a specific value R is given by, it is given by mu power R by R factorial e power minus mu. Of course, R greater than or equal to 0 takes positive values, and mu is the mean. So in our case, when we try to find out the probability density function of the received vector, so here what we have received is a random variable, it's not a vector, so I'll simply write PR H1 or H1. Remember, it is a discrete distribution, so the density function will have a series of impulses. This was discussed in one of the previous videos when we took the example of a die, and I will write the distribution first and then I will explain. The PDF will be N0 to infinity M1 power R e raised to minus M1 divided by R factorial. And there will be a delta function over here like this. Now, if we plot this density function, remember R is the random variable. If you plot this density function, and always R is greater than or equal to 0, if you plot this density function, R0, when you open this series, you can see that for R0, M1 raised to 0 is 1, e raised to minus M1 is e raised to minus M1, and 0 factorial is 1. Delta 0 minus n. Delta 0 minus n is delta minus n, and that is an impulse which is there, which is going to be there at n0. So this is the result of, or rather, this is the first impulse that you are going to get when you plot the density function which we have here. And you can see that for n0 you have delta 0, for n1 you will have delta 1, delta 1 is 0. So n2 you will have delta 2, delta 2 is 0. Similarly, when you go for R1, when R1, if you plot it for R1, this density function for R1, you can see that m1 raised to 1 m1, e raised to minus m1, 1 factorial is 1, and you have delta 1 minus n because R is 1, and when you open the expansion, the first term will be delta 1 which is 0, then n is equal to 1 delta 0, that becomes 1. So you get the next impulse like this. So we are just plotting it now for different values of R, and the strength of this impulse was e power minus m1. The strength of this impulse will be m1 e power minus m1, and so on and so forth. So if I have to show one more here, when R is equal to 2, when you open the series m1 square e raised to minus m1 by 2 factorial delta 2 minus n. So when you open it up for n0, n1, so n0 it will be delta 2 which is 0, n1 it will be delta 1 which is 0, n2 it will be delta 0 which is the impulse that you get, and then for other values of n it will be again delta will become 0. So here also you will get an impulse at R is equal to 2 which has strength m1 square e power minus m1 by 2 factorial. So like this it goes on. So this is how this density function looks like. Now similarly we can write PR H naught. PR H naught will be the only changes in the mean. This is PR H naught. And having obtained these two density functions, we can find out the likelihood ratio. We can find out the likelihood ratio. We can find out likelihood ratio, and that will be a ratio of these two density functions which will be so I'm just writing it down here. So this is how it is going to look like, and we will be of course comparing it with eta to arrive at a decision on which hypothesis was true. Now if you carefully observe this, of course I don't have to write vector because what we have received is just a one discrete random variable. So now if I try to find out gamma 0, capital lambda 0, I'm sorry, it's not gamma, capital lambda. Somehow I keep making that mistake. So capital lambda 0 will be, if you write down capital lambda 0, you can see that it is equal to e raised to minus m1. So remember, you are going to put r0 here. You are just going to put r0 here. So m1 raised to 0, 1, 0 as earlier, r0 factorial is 1. And the impulse will exist only for r equal to, n is equal to 0 because r is 0. And similarly, by same argument in the denominator, we will have only e raised to minus m0. So remember, you are going to find out what is this likelihood ratio for R0, which is this. And similarly, what is the likelihood ratio for R1? So likelihood ratio for R1, when you see, you will get M1 by M0 e raised to minus M1 minus M0. And similarly, one more for 2, it will be M1 by M0 to the power 2 e raised to minus M1 minus M0. So in general, from this trend, we can see that in general is equal to, this is equal to e raised to minus M1 minus M0, M1 by M0 raised to R. And this is what we compare with eta. So again, because of the exponential term, we can go for log likelihood. We get minus M1 minus M0 plus R natural log M1 by M0 H1 H0 natural log eta. And again, we can retain only R on the left hand side and take the other terms. This is the test. This is the test. And this becomes gamma. So once you receive the random variable R, you just compare it with this, where all these terms are known. Of course, M1 is known, M0 is known, eta again we know. So this is the decision rule. And in case M1 was less than M0, in case M1 was less than M0, because if you recall in the data it was given M1 is more than M0. In case it is less than M0, the only change, so this is for M1 greater than M0. If M1 is less than M0, this just flips. it flips because the numerical sign of this will change when m0 is greater than m1. So that ends this video on a few numerical examples, and in the next video we'll move ahead and we'll go further into the topic subject, and we'll see how to arrive at a decision rule when the cost involved and the probability of occurrence of the hypothesis is not known.